One of the reasons I started the Art Dealer Diaries was to capture these important voices of artists, dealers, collectors, writers, photographers, all these individuals that have come into my life or been aware of that I wanted to make sure their voices were captured. And Jeff Aeling was one of those important voices, and he was an artist that recently passed. He was a good friend, and I represented him for probably 25 years. And it's interesting when you look back at a career of an artist and an art dealer, all the things that you go through, the good times, the bad times. But every time Jeff and I were talking to each other, whether it was business related or just personal, we always had these intimate talks about creativity, writing, and art, and movies. He was an erudite in all areas of that, and it showed in his work as well. Jeff passed this last week, and I wanted to make sure that people had the opportunity to listen to this unique voice who changed the way I saw things from an artist's point of view. He was truly an artist. This was done back in December of 2018. Jeff Aeling.
Hey, I got Jeff Aeling. Oh my gosh.
Yeah.
I've known you for how long?
20 years.
20 years. See, that's what happens. You say, oh, I'll do this little art gallery, and then all of a sudden 20 years goes by, and you have, I remember you had jet black hair.
No, I've never had jet black hair.
Brown hair.
Jet brown hair.
I don't know, but I know there was no gray in it.
Yeah, well.
And I had no.
I like to think of myself as beautifully blonde.
You got great hair at least, yeah.
Yeah, at least I got hair.
Yeah, I know. Well, the next 20 years when we meet, it probably won't be that.
Well, you never know. My grandpa kept his.
Yeah,
right
well, you will.
area.
Yeah, but this one will be.
Oh, well.
Yeah, it's going quick. I mean, my dad had no hair, so.
Yeah, what's left is still stylish. That's good.
I'm keeping it looking young. So Jeff came in here today, which is great because we're doing a wonderful show on his cloud paintings and landscape paintings, but I want to find out a lot about Jeff. Now, I've known him for 20 years, but I don't really know the whole story other than what the Kansas Art Institute and things, but where you trained at. But I want to know kind of the backstory. Yeah. And I know you're like an Army brat, right? Is that correct?
Yeah, I was born in Iowa City, Iowa. My dad was going to medical school at University of Iowa. And immediately after graduating from medical school, he entered the Army.
And so you were born when he was still in medical school?
Yeah.
And what did your mom do?
She was a dental hygienist.
Oh, yeah. Very interesting.
Yes.
And did they meet in that environment?
No, they met when my dad was in junior college getting his associate's degree.
I see. So she followed him to Iowa City.
Yeah, they got married and right before he entered medical school.
Yeah, that's how it always was back then.
Then I showed up a year later. I got in just under the wire.
Yeah, yeah. It was important in Iowa City.
Yeah, well.
Yeah, exactly.
There you go.
And so he finished medical school in Iowa, and then he went directly into the Army. What year would have this been?
He was doing his internship. We did that in Fort Benning, Georgia.
Mm-hmm.
And at the end of that, they sent him for Army flight training.
So this is like 61?
This is really early 60s, yeah.
Yeah, so
like
we're
61.
Not really into Vietnam yet. Well, we were,
not
but
yet,
not
coming up
not officially.
on it, yeah.
So why did he go into the military? Was that to pay for school, or he just said, no, I'm just going to do my thing?
Part of it was he had thought that he was going to go into dermatology, and they had a really good derm program in the Army.
Yeah, they do.
And also that, it was going to cover a lot of his expenses. Because,
I understand.
They were poor,
Yep.
And, he went through his internship in Fort Benning, Georgia, and then they sent him out for Army flight training at Pensacola and taught him how to fly airplanes in preparation for moving to Germany. And that was right after the Berlin Wall went up. And he went over 6 months ahead of us. They were doing gigantic military maneuvers in West Germany at that point, because everyone was paranoid that the Russians were going to come
This
down
is
the
like
corridor.
63-ish. Yeah.
Yeah, and he did that for 6 months, and then we moved over, and he was working at the hospital in Landstuhl, which is still the big, in the European theater, it's still the big hospital that everybody goes to. Everybody that's wounded in Iraq or Afghanistan generally ends up in Landstuhl.
Yeah, I think I actually knew that. And so you have a couple brothers and a sister, or when did they come into play?
My brother David, who is the one under me, was born in Fort Benning. My sister was born in Germany, and I have another brother, Mark, that was born in Washington, D.C.
Yeah, so you guys kept zipping around.
Yeah.
So he was doing flight surgery. He was a flight surgeon.
He was a flight surgeon, yeah.
Yep. And he did that for how long? Because he went back and did get that dermatology.
Yeah,
degree,
he
right?
did that for 3 years, and then he got accepted to go to Walter Reed and do his residency in dermatology at Walter Reed.
Yeah, that's a fantastic
And
place.
then we moved from Washington, D.C. to Hawaii in 1968.
Mm.
And he was at Tripler for 3 years, and then we moved to Denver.
So in 68, let's see, you would have been about 9.
68, I would have been 9 going on 10.
Yeah, and you were there for 3 years?
Yeah, we were there during the big riots, actually.
Yeah. Now
It was
tell me about
right-
those.
The awareness of that stuff, what I remember about it, it was, bulletins coming on the TV that Martin Luther King had been assassinated,
Right.
and then immediately stuff started happening in Washington. It got really bad. About a third of downtown D.C. burned down. It was a big mess. And, it was on the TV, all the networks. I mean, it was a big deal. There was riots nationwide, but D.C. was particularly bad.
Do you think that affected you?
Oh, yeah, absolutely.
So to in the way that you
Well,
developed from that
Yeah,
point on?
it's in younger years, like we were in Pensacola during the Cuban Missile Crisis.
Mm-hmm.
And I was only dimly aware of what was going on. I knew that my parents were really freaked out because my dad
Right.
got called in.
Right.
And they were turning us all, everybody had been put on alert. My dad had to go in. They shut down the naval base and the Army base.
Wow.
And, they were freaked out because Pensacola is close to Cuba.
Yeah, your mom must have been really flipped out.
Yeah.
Whether you're young and don't know it or not, you could feel it.
Yeah,
almost
you
like an
feel
animal,
it. The stuff in D.C. in 68, though, I was definitely aware of it.
Yeah.
And, it was frightening. We lived in Silver Spring, but it was, you'd watch the TV and, just block after block after block of buildings on fire. It was really something.
Yeah, I remember those days that because we're similar age in New Mexico. We had, small town, but we still had riots. There were still problems.
Yeah, and then, when Robert Kennedy was assassinated, shortly thereafter, I think it was June 5th or something like that. And yeah, I remember thinking distinctly, everything's just going crazy.
Yeah, world's going to end.
Yeah, absolutely. You have that kind of feeling. And then, being military brat, you're aware of that stuff. When we lived in Hawaii, we lived at Schofield Barracks, and there's a pass through the mountains at Schofield called Koli Koli Pass. And you can go right through that pass over the Waianae Range, and on the other side of it was the weapons depot for the Pacific Fleet.
And where is that? Which island?
That's on Oahu.
Yeah, that's what I thought. Okay. And so when you got there, was it just at the beginning of like 69?
It was August of 68.
Oh, yeah, it was
we got
August
there.
of 68.
Yeah.
Your parents were probably happy to get out of D.C. at that point.
Oh, yeah, absolutely.
And you were there 4 years?
3 years.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Now, that was super formative, I know, in some ways.
Yeah. That was a big, big deal. We I got really interested in surfing and just the ocean in general, which is funny because I could barely swim when I got there. Our parents hooked us up with swimming lessons, and
Yeah.
the first few times I paddled out on a board, I had one of those floaty belts on.
Too bad there's no photos of that one out there.
There's plenty of embarrassing photos.
Yeah. And so you learned how, and I know you're a big surfer, you still surf to this day, but so those from 10 to 13, you were really involved in that surfer scene kind of thing?
Well, on our block, right down the street from me, there was a family, the Owenses, and their oldest son, Bobby, who is a good friend of mine, was an incredible surfer, even when he was really young. And he ended up, being professional. He was really good.
And you would go surf with him?
Yeah, all the time.
Oh, wow. That makes you good fast.
But the main family was on the block behind ours, Colonel Albert Benson. They called him just the Colonel. But he was one of the best-known surf photographers on Oahu at that time, and also shot 16mm movie footage. So any of the stuff you see from that era that's shot on, film, he was responsible for most of that. And for some reason, he did PR for Tripler Medical Center, and they let him stay in that job for like 9 years, which in the Army is unheard of.
Yeah, because usually you get a duty station. Then
usually it's every 3 years you're out, but to keep him in, they just let him stay.
Oh, he's so good.
He was really good at his job. Very personable, nice guy, but a big family and all surfers, and they were right down the street from us, and everybody who was involved in the highest levels of surfing in Hawaii was through that house at one time or another.
And where were you surfing? What beaches would you surf at?
Well, I learned how to surf at Barbers Point Naval Air Station, which is on the South Shore, and it's notorious for being pretty much a weak, crumbly wave. It sometimes gets good in the summertime. Good place to learn.
Yeah.
And we surfed a lot at Waianae at the beach camp. It's on the west side of Oahu, just south of Makaha. And back then you could rent cabins. So our families, those three families, rented cabins over there all the time. So we surfed a lot at Waianae and at Makaha. And
you ever think about you were out there surfing when Obama might have been there too?
I have no idea. He was a town kid.
Yeah, he was. He lived in Honolulu. He surfed, I think, at Waikiki.
Yeah, back then nobody would have been aware of him, and I know a lot of people over there, but I don't know anybody that really had much contact with him. Yeah. I think he was more of a student basketball guy.
Yeah, I think
he can body surf though.
Yeah, we've seen him body.
Yeah, he's not bad.
Yeah,
he's okay.
And so did you get pretty serious with your surfing in that period of time?
In 3 years, you're not going to get very good.
No.
I mean, I was competent, and with surfing, all it takes is competent to you'll get completely hooked on it. There's nothing like it.
Yeah.
But I didn't surf again for a long time after that. We moved to Denver, and I started skiing.
You took up another sport,
Yeah, exactly.
And so when you were doing all this, had you started doing anything related with art at this point?
Really, the first art stuff that I started doing was when I was in third grade. I got interested in it, just in drawing. And, third through fifth grade, I drew all the time.
Same with Howard Post, by the way, third grade for him.
Yeah, but, kid drawings, nothing.
But drawing all the time.
Yeah, drawing all the time. And I had a real fascination. My parents gave me that Time Life series, science series books. And in those books, you'd get these cutaway views. Like I had one on ships.
I remember those.
And it had, a big cruise liner cut in half, so that you could see inside of it. And that's the kind of drawings that I like to do.
Kind of three-dimensional thing.
Well,
As
they
best
were
you
pretty
can.
rudimentary. They were definitely 2D.
Yeah.
But,
Huh?
I loved the idea of cutting a thing in half and, drawing everything that was going on in all the compartments. But, it's funny that you asked that because in the last few years, I'd been thinking about, gee, where did the impulse to make stuff come from? And it hit me that really where it comes out of more than anything else is that we spent the winter in northern Iowa before we moved to Germany. It was just my mom and my grandparents and my brother and I. And in the bedroom that I was in, there's all kinds of Christmas decorations around, and on top of a dresser, they had a shoebox that had a mirror set down in it, and then angel hair. Do you remember angel hair, the spun glass? And then these Christmas ornaments of houses around it like it was a frozen lake. And on the lake were tiny little figures that somehow were in scale with the houses. And I spent hours and hours and hours with that thing. I just loved that miniaturized world, little stuff, that represented big stuff.
Right.
And that kind of thing was always really fascinating to me. The other way you see it, there were a number of older grandpa-aged people one was in Manly, Iowa, where my mom's parents were, and the other was in Washington, D.C., and these two guys were model railroad nuts and had really elaborate HO train setups in their basement. And that stuff really fascinated me, because some of those guys are nuts.
Yeah, they'll do every little tree, every little light, everything.
Yeah, like buildings with all the furniture on the inside and lights, and it can get really obsessively into the minutia of things. But I always loved those things, and when I think back on it, I think as a kid, the attraction to it is that you're presented with a world that's in a digestible chunk, that you feel like you have some kind of control.
I was going to say
over.
safety.
Yeah, safety and control,
You
and
think
that's the kind of play that you have in those environments is, you're creating scenarios in your head all the time and using that as, the jumping off point to create a world for yourself.
You think any of that, though, was when you've got the safe environment and you're in a family that's moving around. Your dad's gone all the time. You don't know if you're going to be going. You've got all these things that are happening.
Well, yeah, like I said, it's the illusion of control over things now.
So does that affect you how you paint now? Because you paint.
I think absolutely that those experiences are the fundamental thing that took me into painting. Now, the irony of that is, as a kid, it's that illusion of control, that you can form your own world and order it and order the way that it behaves. But as you get older, you realize, that's not the way the world works
Bills.
at all. Yeah. Well, it's not just bills.
Yeah,
it's
I know.
the
That's
fundamental fundamental way that nature works. It's vast indifference to you.
Yeah. Well, it's always going to its most least organized form anyway. So
Yeah, absolutely. Entropy.
that's it. And you're going to be part of that entropy whether you want it or not.
Yeah, I'm experiencing that. We're both experiencing that now.
All humans
Witness
do.
the hair, witness
Yeah.
the hair.
So when you paint, though I do want to get back to your earlier life, but when you paint now, I see a real control sense in your works.
Well, I think when you say control, I think that
Well, let me just phrase why, and the way I see control. From a subject matter point, you have a range of material. You can do a lot of things, but there's a range that I would expect to see of the imagery that you like. That
they're very specific things that I'm attracted to.
very specific, controlled.
Yeah, it's interesting. I had never thought of it that way. Yeah, I suppose there is an aspect of control in the stuff that gets selected,
Yeah.
you know. But it gets selected for very specific reasons, you know. One of the things that has really hit me over about the last 10 years is that there's a certain type of landscape that I'm really attracted to. And that's where things open out.
I did it before you even put your hands up, because I know.
It's,
Is that Iowa?
you know, actually, the area of Iowa where my family is from is pretty flat.
Yeah.
Southern Iowa is really hilly.
Yeah.
It's Grant Wood country. It's all up and down. But where we're from, it's pretty flat. I don't know that it's so much that as it's, you know, I'm really attracted to mountain areas. But what I like is those areas, it's like the Front Range of the Rockies, where you have vast open plain and then, you know, something huge like mountains to give scale to it.
Small railroads with a building.
You know, actually, I never paint structures.
No,
Ever,
I know. I'm going
ever,
back as a
ever.
kid in that railroad
Well,
that you're.
yeah,
you know?
absolutely, yeah, absolutely.
Yeah.
And you know, I think the thing that's so attractive about that to me is I really like those areas where, you know, subconsciously you have a feeling of all the hugeness of everything that's outside of the picture. You know, it's like lately I've been painting South Park in Colorado, which is it's an area about 30 by 40 miles right in the middle of the Rockies, and it's surrounded all the way around with huge mountains, some of them, you know, well over 14,000 feet. And I love getting up in there because you have that scale sense of, you know, people, when you're right on top of those mountains, they look just, you know, compared to a human being, they're gigantic.
Yeah.
But you get in that open space up there in that park, and those mountains don't look big at all, you know, and it really gives you a sensation of just how large that sky is. You know, when you see clouds moving through it.
Yeah, that's true, because your paintings are often 2/3 sky.
Yeah, absolutely. And you know, the other thing about those kind of spaces is, I mean, for me, subconsciously, you really get the feeling that you were standing on a planet that is going round and round. You know, that sky is passing over you continually. And there's something about that kind of landscape that suggests the hugeness of everything outside of it.
You think Denver was a little bit of that too? Because
Absolutely.
you know, people think Denver's right in the mountains. Well,
No,
not. It's really
not.
not. You can see them in the distance, and otherwise, and there's real flatness. to
Denver
the
is very much
east.
like that. The other place that's really like that is Hawaii. That's one of the reasons why I like Hawaii so much.
In Kauai, primarily, or
Well,
not?
Kauai is the place where I feel it the most. When you go up on the north coast of that island, and you know, above the ocean, it's a lot of bluffs. You're, you know, 200 or 300 feet above the ocean, and you look out to the north, and you know, it's next stop Japan.
Yeah.
It's like 4,000 miles of ocean in between, and you really get that kind of discombobulated, holy cow, that's a lot of water out there feeling, especially when the surf is really big. You know, you get that feeling that you are standing in the middle of forces over which you have not the slightest vestige of control
and you don't.
over anything. Oh, absolutely.
Yeah.
But, it's those kind of spaces where you really have a feeling for the hugeness of things.
I get that same feeling at Mauna Kea when I'm
Yeah,
close,
absolutely.
it
Well, you were
just-
showing that video last night.
Yeah.
That's a really humbling experience of, you're flying over and you can see that rift line going all the way up to the crater.
This was an image
to the
of
top.
the volcano when it was blasting. I took a helicopter right over it and took open door video of it, and it was just
Oh,
mind-boggling.
gosh.
At that moment you feel humbled, that you realize how powerful
Oh,
Mother
yeah.
Earth is, and totally beyond your control.
Well, it's one of those really weird places where you have the most primitive forces on the planet right
Yeah,
there
it's
present
primordial.
for you.
Mhm.
And yet, up on the top of the other mountain is some of the best astronomy,
Yeah,
on the planet.
in the world. That's right. Get on Mauna Kea, and which is also another world unto itself.
Yeah, it's
Getting on
bizarre
top of
up
that
there.
is just-
Absolutely bizarre.
And
Well, it's a
freezing.
14,000-foot mountain coming right out of the ocean.
Yeah, no, it's unbelievable.
Yeah, it's really, really something. It looks like the moon or Mars.
Yeah, it's very
up
much
there.
like the moon. And if those who haven't
Yeah.
gone up, I highly encourage you
Yeah.
to get a 4-wheel drive and go up to the top, because it's just mind-blowing. It really is. Have you
Well,
never painted that? God, that'd be fantastic.
No,
I
I've
could totally,
never- I've
I
never
could totally
painted
see
it.
you do that.
I've thought sometimes, as I'm getting older now and running out of time, there's all kinds of paintings that I'd like to make, and there are certain things that really interest me in that respect. Now, telescopes, I think, are just really interesting. Just the functionality of the architecture of them is really strange to me.
Yeah, you should go up on one of those, either on Maui or on
Yeah,
Big Island.
the one on Maui is really odd too. That's the
really
big
crazy.
top secret one.
Oh, is it?
Yeah, everything's hush hush about that. Yeah, the NSA runs that one. So
Getting back to kind of where you got into art. So you go to Denver, and now you're kind of a teenage going through junior high, really high school at that point, right?
1 year of junior high and then all of high school.
And so how was that with relation to your art? Were you continuing to make art at that point? Did you kind of see a vision for yourself yet?
Well, not really, because when I was in junior high, I got bit by the music bug real heavy when we were still in Hawaii. There were people living on our block that actually played in bands and stuff, and I started, buying records, and it was a great time for music. I mean, it was just going to the PX, discovering the Beatles.
Yeah. Is that where you discovered it was a PX in Hawaii?
Yeah,
Yeah.
pretty much so, yeah. It's funny. I got really bitten hard by the music thing, and starting in junior high, I started playing.
And what instrument?
Guitar, of course.
Yeah, of course.
Yeah, guitar, drums.
How long was your hair?
When I first got there, shorter
Yeah.
than it is now. But
Yeah. What did your dad think when you kind of went that?
oh,
rock and roll?
they were not happy.
Yeah, I would think not.
They were not happy with the art thing either.
Yeah?
But,
Did he fight that hard?
it's funny because he was a Sunday painter and always enjoyed dabbling in it. But for me to take it up as a profession, I think scared the hell out of him. He just really wasn't keen on it. But he sent me to art school, so
He did. So he got his dermatology. He became a dermatologist.
yeah.
And you said, yeah, I do want to do this, and he sent you there. But did you think about music school too at some point?
No, I didn't,
So
because
that was a phase, more or less.
well, kind of. By the time I got out of high school, the band that I was in had broken up. We'd done basically what you do in a high school band. We were fairly successful. We played sock hops all the time.
Yeah.
And it was a lot of fun, but the band I was in broke up. And by that point, I'd started to get interested in theater,
Oh, yeah, that's right. I
technical
remember
theater,
that.
yeah. and was doing that real heavy, and did that, for years afterwards.
Yeah. So when you went to college, when you went to college, you got a degree from the Art Institute.
Oh yeah,
right?
I went whole hog into the art thing.
Yeah. But you became a designer for sets, or tell us about that.
Yeah. Well, the way that it started was the high school that I was in had a really, really, really good theater program. The guy that was the director there was, in Actors Equity, and he had his own company outside of teaching at the school. And he'd take kids out of that program and introduce them to professional people around town. So I started getting to do stuff that you get paid for, relatively early. And there are a lot of people that went through that program that did, a guy that graduated just a couple years before me that came back and worked in that program, in a paid position afterwards. It was John Wells, who became a gigantically successful television producer and writer. You've seen, he was the executive producer for, his first show was China Beach, and then he did ER, and The West Wing, and
He produced it.
Yeah, he was the executive producer on those. Yeah, he's
David Lynch was David for West Wing.
No, Aaron Sorkin.
Aaron Sorkin
was the main writer on
LA
West Wing.
Outlaw, I think, is Aaron Sorkin's too.
Yeah, Aaron Sorkin's great television writer. But John went on and did all kinds of stuff. He's directing films now, and he's still doing a lot of writing. But
so what were you doing? What was your role in those?
Well, when I first started out doing theater stuff, it was just, whatever was going on, you learned the stagecraft. You learn how you actually put on a show. What's involved in it.
So you were more on the technical aspect
always,
of it, right?
Yeah,
not on stage.
I never had any interest in actually participating and being in shows.
You liked the design, the set, the lighting.
Yeah, I liked the creating of the little world.
Yeah.
Was always just fascinating to me, and all of the particulars of putting on a performance, the ritual of it, it's really, there's just nothing like it.
And you did that for 8 years?
Yeah, I did it. When I got out of high school, then I started going to the Art Institute, and then I'd work theater-related jobs in the summertime. And when I got out of art school, it was really the only marketable skill that I had. And I got a job with a company that was a drop rental house, and I designed packages of scenery.
This was in Kansas City, or
this is in Kansas City? Yeah, and I worked for them for years.
And what would you do?
Well, the way drop rental houses work is, at any given time in the United States, there are literally thousands of high schools and community theaters, small colleges that are doing productions of this or that. And, there are all the standards, especially in musical theater. There's the canon of stuff that everybody does.
Right.
And one of the problems that groups like that run into is that it's very expensive to put together a really good set of scenery, especially for musicals, because a lot of the time there's 4 or 5 different settings for it. So what a drop rental house does is I design wing and drop packages where you have, you'll have a proscenium, and then you have wings that are usually dimensional. They're, partially painted and then cut out and supported with netting. And you'll have sometimes 2 or 3 of those, and then a backdrop at the back of it. So you have a complete set of scenery for that scene. And, it's all hung on battens and flown in and out.
So you would design, paint.
I would design and paint the whole whack. So, all those musical theater war horses, Guys and Dolls, West Side Story, Oklahoma, The Music Man, all of those.
I was in The Music Man. You may have provided that.
I'm from Mason City, which is where Meredith Wilson
I was
is
one of
from.
the little kids in The Music Man when I did that, but in college theater. So were you painting or doing anything, related to
when I got
your
out
profession?
when I got out of art school, I was working, as a set designer and painting the scenery to make money. And when I was in art school, there were a number of friends that I had. That was a time in art school where there were bands coming out of art schools. Some really good bands like Talking Heads. Those guys all went to RISD, the Rhode Island School of Design. And, most art schools had at least a band or two, and the Art Institute was no different. And I had friends that were in those bands, and the thing that was really interesting about it to me was that the idea of, when I was in bands when I was in high school, it was always cover bands. We were always playing other people's music. And the idea of writing music was completely alien to me. It's like, oh no, that's something that those up
Real bands
in Valhalla do.
Yeah.
And, in art school and with the whole thing with punk rock and art school bands, there was this real do-it-yourself aesthetic to it of people saying, oh, I can do this too. And when I got out of school, I started doing music again really seriously and did that. And as far as art activities go, it was music more than anything.
Playing in a band or?
I had a band. I was mostly interested in songwriting, though. It was always really interesting to me. And as time went on, the band never went anywhere, but I had a songwriting partnership with a guy that was in a fairly successful band. And we wrote together for a while, and I did that right up until I got married in 1987. And at that point, I was 29 years old. And I was like, oh, I'm getting a little bit too old for this, and decided to pull the plug on it and go back to painting.
And at that time frame, so you were working in the band, writing songs. You were also doing the art design to make some money.
And still making some art.
Yeah.
I did quite a bit of art the first about year and a half that I got out of school, and then
Was this figurative? What was it?
it was always figurative stuff.
I thought that's what you did earlier.
Yeah, very much so. I always really liked figurative work.
And when did you switch over to doing landscape?
Well, that was kind of inadvertent. When after I got married, I started art making. I always figured if I was working, I would have enough time to do music or painting, but not enough for both. And the kind of work that I was doing, I always tell kids as they're coming up, the most important thing you need to do is you need to develop good drawing skills, because if you can draw, then there are dozens and dozens of applications for that skill.
And do you think that requires going to art school?
I think it's really helpful, but you got to pick the right school. I mean, I have seen people that have been through 4 years of art school that can't draw their way out of a paper bag. You have to seek out that kind of training, because it's not emphasized. The physical skill thing of learning how to draw is not valued like it used to be.
Right.
I mean, you can get, there's a lot of very famous people that don't touch their hands on anything that goes out with their name on it.
Yeah. Yeah, no, that's true. Or you have people like Paul McCartney who can't read music.
Well, he can now.
He says he can't. Though, of course, he is fantastic.
Oh, yeah. Well,
he's beyond...
it's funny that you bring him up, because, I think a lot of the time about, differing times have differing art forms that prevail in them. And, to me, everything past, really the 20th century, the two big forms that are the most successful, or I think the best stuff has been done, are, it's not visual art or music or, regular, what I would consider to be serious, they say classical, but it's not really classical. I mean, serious, orchestral music. The stuff that really has stuck and made an impact, and I think is really some of the best stuff out there, is all in film and music.
Yeah, it does go together.
I would personally, I'd put the Beatles up there against anything. I mean, if I were going to a desert island and I had a choice of, okay, well, you can pick out any de Kooning you want, or you can get, the box set of everything the Beatles recorded, in a good stereo. I know what I'm going with, And I've heard all that music, thousands and thousands of times, but it's still...
Well, you could also make your own art. You could build your
well,
own
yeah,
sets
there's
of,
always that.
Little sets of
exactly.
desert scenes. He's a good painter, too. Paul McCartney's actually a very, very, very competent artist.
Yeah.
He could have probably done that easily as a profession.
Well, those guys, to me, there's something that's really, truly transcendent about that stuff. I mean, it gets across in a way. I mean, the thing that is continually frustrating to me is, I've looked at a lot of art and studied art history in some depth, and a lot of the modernist stuff just doesn't do anything for me. It gets into the realm of the toolbox for me. It's like, oh my, look at my planer.
Yeah.
Isn't it wonderful? Isn't it a pure thing, the shavings as it comes off?
Yeah.
But
to be specific, you love people like de Kooning, Rothko, Agnes Martin.
Yeah. Now, de Kooning,
Joseph Albers.
Yeah.
You're talking more installational, conceptual art.
Even some of the best painting that I've ever seen. I mean, when I think about art history, what delineates success in an artist? To me, does it really help clarify what it's like to be alive? At any given time.
Emotion.
Does it provide insight into, all of those basic struggles that people have to engage in? And for me, the comparison, say, take a guy like de Kooning and put it up against, like Leonardo da Vinci. Da Vinci didn't do that many paintings. I think, there are 25 of them out there that people know about. And, as far as a qualitative evaluation, I mean, certainly it's subjective to a certain point. But, in my mind, there's no doubt that da Vinci is miles beyond anything de Kooning ever did.
And price-wise, if you went by the auction house, they would say you agree, since one just sold for $400 million.
Well, what people value as far as putting money down, it's always interesting to see how those decisions get made. But I just think about, like, you really take a good look at Virgin of the Rocks, and it's just layer upon layer upon layer of depth and meaning, and it transcends the cultural context of when it was made. I mean, people are fundamentally different now than when that painting was made, yet it still connects.
Yeah, it's still current.
And there's also the more ephemeral aspect of it's a handmade object. I had an experience, this is, coming up on 20 years ago. A guy that I knew that was an art critic, and the guy was a dazzling intellect. I mean, broadly deeply read and extremely intimidating. And I would have conversations with him, and I always felt just, on tenterhooks because, the depth of the knowledge
Right.
he was more deeply read than I was, and it was extremely intimidating. And until one day I was having a conversation with him, and somehow Leonardo da Vinci had come up, and I was talking about that, the tactile quality of, he's making handmade objects, and just the look and the feel of the way that the paint is applied. And he said to me, "Oh, Jeffrey, surely you understand that anybody can paint like Leonardo. It's the intellectual content of it that makes it great."
That shows he wasn't an artist.
Well, it was at that moment that I said in my own head, this guy, he knows a lot of stuff, but about painting, he's utterly and completely full of shit.
Yeah.
He has no idea what he just said.
Yeah, he hasn't painted.
Well, I know for a fact that there may be maybe in 7 billion people, maybe 2 or 3 human beings on the face of the planet right now that are even capable of making the marks in a painting like Virgin of the Rocks.
Yeah.
I mean, it's a skill level that is, well,
It's like anything. I think it's like Einstein in mathematics.
well, yeah.
Or Bach in music, or you take your pick, whether it's an athlete, Seth Curry that can hit a three-pointer
Oh,
every
yeah,
time.
I know.
I mean,
the people that are at the tip top
Yeah.
of skills and professions that require true physical control
Yeah.
of what they're doing.
Gifted is
And
what I would call it.
and I mean, that's an argument that I have in my own head all the time is, what are these differences between, how important is facility in a thing?
I think it's important.
Yeah, to a certain extent, but then other side of the coin, I can think of a painter like Van Gogh. Not very facile.
In color sense, I would say.
Oh, absolutely.
Yeah.
But I mean, in terms
No,
of,
that's true. But
you
I
know-
think color sense is also a facility.
yeah, it's a different form.
Outwards.
It's a different form of facility.
Yeah.
I'm talking about,
You're talking about hand-eye coordination more.
I'm talking about rendering and draftsmanship.
Yeah.
A guy like, say, Thomas Eakins
Yes.
versus a guy like Van Gogh. I mean,
Yeah. No, yes.
Eakins
comparison. Yeah.
is in complete control
Yeah.
as a draftsman.
Yeah.
I mean, he can, if you say,
His surgery painting was one of the greatest ever.
oh yeah, draw a shoe,
Yeah.
you're going to get 2 different looking
Yeah.
shoes from those 2 guys, and one is what
One's
I
a
would
clown
call,
shoe and one's another one.
well, one you would consider more facile.
Yeah.
It's
I see
more
what you're
it's
saying.
more exacting.
Yeah. I look at it more as a hand-eye coordination
But
kind of.
I think you hit the nail on the head when you say facile in terms of sensitivity to color, emotionally facile.
Exactly.
And
And that can
it's-
also be in sculpture, where you see individuals who can put these 3-dimensional things together. That is, how do they see that even?
Yeah, sometimes you get painters that are just gronky as hell, that it seems like they have very little actual control over their marks and what their hand is doing, yet it is powerful. It's good. And I'm always kind of back and forth with that stuff, because I love, the more gestural, painterly quality in things, but I don't particularly paint that way myself.
No.
People always say to me, "Oh, well, gosh, your work looks just like a photograph."
And you want to throw up every now.
Well, I understand
Yeah.
where they're coming from with it, because it's, I am from the age of the photograph.
Yeah.
Photographic imagery is completely integrated into my perception. I had a teacher in the Art Institute, and he was always saying, "Oh, you have to observe nature. Nature, 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 nature." And you'd look at his paintings, and this guy was named Wilbur Ewald. As of this point, I believe that he's still alive. I hated his painting when I was in school, but as I've gotten older, I've come to just, the guy is just a titan. He's really, really, really good. But he says, I'm observing nature, but the things are not natural at all. There's nothing natural about them when you get down to the brass tacks of, okay, what's natural? He's going out, he loves to paint landscape, and he goes out and he'll work on a painting for, 3 or 4 months. So, yeah, you're observing nature, but observing what exactly in nature? Because I know for a fact the cloud cover on every one of those days is going to be different.
Every one of those hours.
So what he's really painting is, yes, it's nature, but it's an amalgam of nature. There's nothing specific. And he's just like me. He doesn't put cars in his paintings. There's no people. There's, things are going by the wayside all the time. But it's an amalgam of the experience of sitting there and observing the thing. And, I think that's a valuable thing to do. It's not what I'm inclined to do, but I'm really glad that he's doing it, But, it's, back to photography, it's the big difference between him and me. I had a conversation with him one time out at a restaurant, and he was saying, oh, well, you need to paint a still life. You need to do this. You need to do that. And I finally said to him, Wilbur, you're telling me that I need to do these things, but the reality is you need to do these things. Because these things that you're describing are a complete anathema to me.
Yeah, they don't have any
They're
meaning.
Anachronistic.
Yeah.
I said, I'll bet you can remember a time when there was no television. Oh, certainly I can. On and on. I said,
I can't.
Look, I can't. My perception, when I dream, there are cinematic qualities to how I dream, that are informed by camera position and cutting and all that stuff leaches into you,
right.
And photographic sensibility is completely integrated.
It's interesting,
into everybody.
in fact, you say that because I could see your paintings easily being the background of many, many movies or shows. They just definitely, I never thought of it.
They have that kind of cinematic quality.
They definitely do. Especially some of those big skies, lonely areas. In fact, it'd be wonderful to see a whole movie done just with your paintings in the background.
Well, I tend to really love films that have that kind of painterly quality. One of my favorite movies of all time is Night of the Hunter, that Robert Mitchum, where he plays the guy with love and hate on his knuckles.
Yeah.
And Charles Lawton directed it.
Oh, yeah.
Guy, the Hunchback of Notre Dame.
Yeah, no, I was going to say he's a good actor.
Great actor and really good director. And the thing that's so interesting about that movie is it was all shot on soundstage. So all of the settings are just completely controlled. And it has the most interior dreamlike quality to it. It just seeps into you. Another movie that's like that is To Kill a Mockingbird.
Yeah.
All that stuff with, Jem and Scout in the woods, and she's dressed as a ham.
Yeah. Yeah. Well, I think the Coen brothers have a sensibility.
They have a sensibility.
Just, oh my God. Name the movie and it's there.
Yeah, they are really something.
Yeah. Fargo wouldn't be Fargo without that austereness.
Yeah, absolutely.
Yeah.
It really gets the feel of it. The other one like that I was thinking of is Girl with the Dragon Tattoo.
Yeah.
I saw the Swedish version of it and didn't really care for it.
Yeah, I saw that one as well.
And then I saw the David Fincher version of it, and the atmosphere of it was all that stuff with the car
Yeah.
going through the snowy landscape up to the sort of creepy house in the middle of nowhere in Sweden, and it's gray and snowing, and it's wow.
Setting can make mood. I mean,
Yeah,
it does.
absolutely, positively.
Yeah.
And
I feel those in your paintings too. When I look at them, that one painting of the trees, you know,
yeah,
there's some kind of, I find that to be, and this is a painting that's just, it's a vertical painting with lots of pine, some kind of trees. I don't know what they
there are
are.
pines.
Yeah, and just a little bit of pink clouds in the background, and in the foreground there's like almost like a little line of fog that's made its way through.
Yeah,
and
it's a real, it has a very dreamy kind of feel. It's much more interior, you know, in the head kind of painting than what I normally do, you know. But that, I mean, to me, there are very specific types of landscape painting, you know, and that, you know, you have vistas, you have glades, and you have grottos. There's really only three fundamental types of composition for landscape painting. You know, vistas, everything opened out. You know, it's the individual identity in the context of the hugeness of nature. Glades, always trees, you know, which are often, you know, surrogates for human form. That's why a tree has a trunk, you know, just like a man has a trunk. You know, guys, I think of in that context, Corot, all of those landscapes that he did with nudes in them, where it's about realizing commonality with nature or processes in nature, you know, relationship to it. And it starts to move more interior. And then you have what I call grottos, which is enclosed interior space. And that's guys like, you know, Odilon Redon, Gustave Moreau, you know, Arnold Backlund, all of those symbolist painters. A lot of the time they're enclosed. Piranesi is like that, although they're architectural spaces. But it's a completely psychologically interior space, you know, and that's, you know, the world of the mystic, you know, of you go to sleep and you go into that kind of space where knowledge from elsewhere
seeps
into you, you know.
So when you do a tree painting like that, which I think is kind of out of your norm, what inspires something like that? Or is there inspiration in that?
Often those things have a super, super, super long gestation period.
Are we talking years?
Yeah. Yeah.
Interesting.
I have some paintings that I've done that you'll see something, you know, for me, my memory is very visually triggered, and you see something and it really sticks with you, and it permeates in, and you find that, you know, there's something about it that, you know, you'll dream about, or it pops into your head at times when you're not expecting it. That, for me, I try to pay attention to that stuff because I think there's potency in it. You know, it sticks with you for a reason. And, you know, a lot of the time I'll just, hey, God, you know, I should really make a painting of that. But it takes a long time for it to gel
Bubble
enough
up
to
the
actually,
surface.
so you're actually able to physically execute the thing with some sort of a semblance of the feeling of, you know, what you've been having as the thing enters your mind.
And do you wake up and go, hey, I'm going to...
Every once in a while, you know, especially as I get older, you know, I'm making more and more stuff just for myself these days, you know, paintings that I would never expect to be able to sell. But you just make it because you feel a need to, you know.
And when you make something like this painting, and it's a very successful painting, do you at that point go, okay, I'm done with that imagery and I don't need to revisit it? Or if it was so successful, you go, I think I need to do more?
Well, you know, it just depends. You know, sometimes you get it out and it's just gone and you're not thinking about it anymore. But sometimes it's not, or you're dissatisfied in some way. You think it can be improved upon. And normally, in the past, I have not really thought about stuff like that. Normally when I finish a thing, it's okay, I'm done.
Right.
And
I'm a professional. I'm on to the next.
It gets framed and crated, and it's out the door,
Right.
and I never see it again. And that doesn't bother me at all. But there are some things that I make that hang around for years and years and years. Like if you come to my studio, you'll see paintings from 30 years ago.
That you liked, and you just said, I'm going to hang on to this for a while.
Yeah, well, and there's also ones that you don't like.
Yeah. That you go, I don't want this out, but I don't want to destroy it at this point.
Yeah. And, destroying work is a weird thing. I find it difficult to do.
And why is that, you think?
I think for me, it's partially you hold it back because you think there may be a time when you can, like, just in the last, say, 6 or 7 years, having painted for so long, you start to accumulate stuff that you're not really sure about, and that's not a lot of stuff for me, but I always have, like, if I do 50 or 60 paintings in a year, there may be 2 or 3 of them that I'm, just not comfortable with, and I'll leave them out, or stuff that hasn't sold, over a long period of time, and end up back in the studio. And you have that kind of stuff around, and just in the last 6 or 7 years, every once in a while I'll get one out and say, well, it doesn't matter what I do to this. I'm just going to do something radically different with it, and if I can turn it into something, great, and if I don't, then who cares?
And so you'll modify what you painted, or
yeah, I'll just start going right over the top of a thing, and completely repaint a whole painting. Just to see what happens.
And what happens sometimes is that
sometimes you come up with something that's kind of cool.
Yeah.
But that sort of stuff for me it's a lot more subjective. I may be find something that I'm really liking in it, but that doesn't necessarily mean that it's going to translate
to sales. Yeah, I see that all the time, actually, as a gallerist. Some of my most favorite paintings, i.e. your tree painting, which is different than your subject matter you do, immediately I go, oh my God, I love this painting. It's genius. I don't know if it's going to sell easily or not.
Yeah,
but
you never know.
I love it. And
yeah, I've done some paintings like that were, like, I went through a period where I was starting to think, the work had been getting more and more refined looking. The drawing had gotten more particular in it, and I found myself thinking one day, 10 years ago, 15 years ago, there was a much more gestural, brushy quality to the stuff that I was doing, and there was a rawness to it that I liked, that had gradually been dissipating. Things have been getting more specific, and I thought, what can I do that would actually force me into those kind of faster decision-making process when putting paint on. And I started painting with encaustics, which is, it's melted wax. It's all it is beeswax with pigment in it. And I had 2 pancake griddles with muffin tins on it, and started painting with these things. And it was so interesting because, first of all, your brush is hard, so you have to melt it on the griddle, clear whatever wax is left on there, and you mix your color, and either you lift it out of the tin or off the griddle, which you can use as a palette to keep it melted, and you have approximately maybe 3 at the outside 4 seconds to make a decision of where you're going to put it. And it
Forces your hand.
Forces your hand, and you have to get more gestural. Things have to be less specific. There are trade-offs. The marks are more expressive, but they're less specific. And God, I worked with that stuff, and I just loved painting with it. And some of those qualities started going back into the work. And I did probably 20, 25 paintings like that because they go fast. You have to work fast.
Right.
And was very excited about them and got a bunch framed out and sent them out, and I could not sell them.
Is it color-wise, you think?
No, it was not color. It was the rawness.
Texture.
It was the rawness of the mark making.
Ah.
It was the lack of specificity.
Do you still have those?
Yeah, I do.
I'd like to see images if you would send me some.
Yeah, I did a number of them that I thought were quite successful.
I'd like to see those, actually.
But, it's a thing that happens with professional painters is, in some ways it's a good thing, in some ways it's a bad thing. Like a guy like Corot, who is one of my all-time favorite painters. But, he was engaged in a commercial enterprise. This guy was painting for a living. And there were certain expectations about what a Corot painting looked like.
Right.
And, he could make those paintings beautifully, and believe me, I would be very happy to have one. But there are pressures exerted. The older you get as an artist, there are expectations of what your work looks like.
Yes, very much so.
And in some ways that's constraining, and in other ways it's it is what it is. It's what you are,
right.
What you developed into. And I think about some of my favorite painters, and generally most of them didn't get good until they hit middle age, and a lot of the time it's a very late stuff that is, when they really have a solid idea of who they are and what they're about. Like Giorgio Morandi, that guy paints. I mean, and he was always a Giorgio Morandi, but I mean, they didn't get bad when it got old.
Well, I think Ed Mell is one of those guys that really just keeps getting better and better. I just,
well, I
he's
think
freer.
Yeah, I think that happens.
Dixon did the same thing. He started, getting rid of the extraneous stuff that he didn't need at the end.
Well, that, we were talking earlier when we were in the car today about, hitting 60 years old. And for me, probably the most salient point about those kinds of markers is, the one thing that I am constantly conscious of now is, geez, you're running out of time.
Yeah.
And
right. How much more can I
all
paint?
the bullshit starts flying out the window. It's like, oh, do I really have time for this? No, see ya.
Yeah. Yeah, it's true. It's freeing in some respects, I think.
Yeah, so, there's always been a reductive quality to what I do, where I'm constantly eliminating things out of it, that just seem distracting.
Yeah, I think painters have to learn that to some extent, and I see it in younger painters. Often they're trying to throw in everything they can.
The kitchen sink.
Let's have the rainbow, the birds, and everything. Okay, get rid of the rainbow, get rid of the birds. Do like you did in your one painting, where you have a huge landscape, a cloud, and a single sun that's penetrating through it. That's all you need.
Yeah, where you just let everything else go.
Yeah, just let it all go, and it'll all. Sublime is very powerful.
Well, yeah, I mean, austere, sublime. For me, a big aspect of the sublime is surrender in front of hugeness. That's a thing that I run into sometimes, like at openings, that I'll meet people, that are coming to see the work, and they'll say, "Oh, God, it's just so beautiful," and then you do something that, because I am attracted to painting some stuff that's, like weather. I love weather.
Yeah.
Thunderstorms, extreme.
Your supercell. You did a supercell in this one. And you really captured it.
That to me it's part of what makes nature sublime, is that it's scary.
Yeah.
It's beautiful, but it's horrifying too.
I saw one time and felt all those emotions. And then I turned my car around, because it was east of Amarillo, and said, I don't think we should go through that.
Yeah, absolutely.
And I was glad. There was like 14 or 15 tornadoes where we would have gone right through it. You could just tell it. You could see it in the colors, in the sensibilities. Even though where I was, it was on the side of it where there wasn't the horrificness. But
it's
the power going in was, ooh. And why did you choose to do that little painting of a supercell?
Just because I think for starters, it's visually just so stunning and out of the ordinary. Yeah. But it's also because it's gigantic and scary.
Yeah.
And
would you do that large ever? Because that's a commitment.
I have done. I've painted a lot of tornadoes.
Yeah. I've seen that.
I used to buy tornado videos, and I had a big TV screen and a really good freeze frame on my video player, and I'd just watch them and go, stop, and make a painting.
Yeah. So you could use it as a reference.
Yeah, exactly. That kind of stuff is endlessly fascinating for me. And it's, to me, a part of the picture. If you like, people tend to be attracted to my work because they, I like those times a day where everything is in high transition, where the color is more high key, where the light is more extreme. But, I like the stuff that's memorable, and a huge part of nature is that it's gigantic and awe-inspiring and horrifying sometimes.
Yeah, whether it's water, whether it's clouds, fire, all those things.
Well, you were showing me that video, part of the volcano, that big rift opening up, all the way up the mountain there. And a big part of the appeal of that is it's horrifying.
Yeah.
There's 1,000 houses gone.
Yeah.
If you get in the way of that, good luck.
No, it's insane. The power.
Yeah, and there's
you
something.
Should paint. Have you painted a volcano, by the way? That would be a fascinating painting for you.
No, I haven't. Yeah. But it's funny that you bring it up.
I'm going to send you some images.
My dad just passed, and was saying that he was a Sunday painter. I have a few of his paintings, but one of them is a volcano in Hawaii. Yeah,
because that's a tough subject matter to try to take on.
Yeah, it's pretty.
Yeah,
it's pretty daunting trying to get something like that, because it's.
Yeah, no, trying to capture.
That's biting off a big chunk of something there.
Well, we bit off a big chunk of something here too. Believe it or not, we've already gone over an hour.
Oh, geez Louise. Great conversation, Mark.
Yeah, no, it's always fun. One of my favorite things with you was when we have a show together, and we don't have them enough, but is just the time I get to spend with you to talk. One of the most interesting things in having you as a dealer for me is, I knew you for years, and then I found out, oh, gee, Mark's writing these books. And he gave me a couple of the books, and I took them home and went, I just love these things. They're like, God, the stories are just so interesting to me. And it triggered, we actually started talking more about this kind of stuff. Yeah.
And, finding
common ground.
Common ground and similar interests, and your interests are a lot broader than just contemporary Western art.
Oh, yeah.
You're looking at a lot of different stuff, and a lot of common ground. So.
Yeah, well, I think one of the fun things was when you can find an artist as a gallerist who not only you appreciate their art and get it, but you also like the person. And Jeff Aeling, I like you.
Mark, I like you too.
We'll meet again just to go have a dinner maybe in Denver sometime when you're over there.
It's been one of the really nice things is, we've turned into bros over the years.
Yeah.
So
It happens if you represent people long enough, that it becomes at a different level of commitment.
You start to really
it's
understand some stuff about the other person,
That's right.
which is really great.
Right. Great. All right. Thank you, my
Thank you,
friend.
sir.
All right. Art Dealer Diaries. Jeff Aeling, a fantastic artist and a very interesting human being.
Well, thanks, Mark.